the good, the bad, and the straight up terrifying. Planes have been the top choice for transportation of long distances in the past 100 years. But the question is, how were they made, and who had the ridiculous idea of sending people into the sky? By revolutionizing transportation and warfare, the Wright brothers' success at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina marked the most significant turning point in the early 20th century. Innovators in the transportation industry made a big splash leading into the 1900s. The industry went from the first motorized vehicle in 1886 to the idea of flying machine in the span of 20 years. But actually accomplishing the task of flight wouldn't be easy. There was still a big gap from the inception of the flying machine to the actual achievement of flight. The Wright brothers eventually found the right balance of weight and thrust to achieve liftoff, which marked the most significant turning point in the early 20th century. From that point forward, humans were able to modify these flying hunks of metal to make them more efficient at getting to their destination and to turn them into deadly warfare machines. Orville and Wilbur Wright grew up in a caring family where their dad Milton Wright was a bishop and their mother Susan Wright was a creative woman who taught their children how to make all manner of things. Susan gave her sons intelligence on how to use construction techniques to create new things. As they went through their middle and high school years, they started making some rubber-panned helicopters. This could be seen as the genesis to their aspirations of achieving flight. Those rubber-band helicopters looked like this. This was one of the key factors to them being inventors. But in the beginning, their aspiration of being inventors was short-lived because they need to make money. So in 1889, both Orville and Wilbur Wright went into the printing business. They didn't have much success in this business because their printing press couldn't keep up with the already established companies, so they decided to hop on the latest trend around the 20th century: bicycles. They started a bike shop, and they actually began to make some of their own bikes. Some of those bicycles looked like this. Their venture into bicycles only lasted a year because while they were finding success in the bicycle business, they had found a new infatuation: airplanes. After they slowed down production in their bicycle shop, they began dedicating time to the construction of the first airplane. Their experience with the manufacturing of bicycles helped them in their quest to build an airplane. The Air and Space Museum wrote, "Bicycles and airplanes have more in common than one might think, and the Wrights' familiarity with bicycles contributed to their invention of mechanical flight." Way back in 500 BC, the first kite was created. This was the first time that man-made objects flew in the air by harnessing the power of wind. The creation of kites was something that happened a very long time ago, but it is the first step in human flight. Something that really sparked the invention of flying machines is birds. Some of the designs looked like this. The idea of making the bird-like prototype was a huge step in the right direction for the invention of the first airplane, because if a bird can fly, why not imitate the bird? This led to the beginning of aerodynamics, because some experimenters looked at the research of other experimenters, and there was some groundwork done in aerodynamics. That was said by Peter Jacobs. Though we don't use these kinds of models, it still managed to make a huge impact on the creation of the first airplane. The Wright brothers were now in a race to get the first plane credited to them, but they had one obstacle in their way. Alexander Graham Bell was also in the pursuit to make the first plane. He had already made the first telephone in 1876, but now he wanted to be known as one of, if not the best inventors the world has ever known. In 1901, Alexander Graham Bell was talking to his wife about his thoughts on the flying machine, which he was so infatuated with. This is what he said: "Since you left, the kite, or rather the flying machine, has occupied pretty nearly all of my thoughts." He was telling his wife about how much he was obsessed over the creation of the flying machine. At this point in time in 1901, the Wright brothers were very close to understanding flight and getting to the first flight ever accomplished. In terms of the first flyer, there was nothing special to it, but it was just a general idea to the concept of flight. The first attempt at flight by the Wright brothers did not go very well because the plane dove headfirst into the ground with Wilbur in the pilot seat. But luckily, Wilbur walked away without any injuries. Needless to say, the next test would be with Orville in the pilot seat instead of Wilbur. At this point in time, Orville and Wilbur Wright were incredibly determined to make the first flying machine. Their determination led them to December 17, 1903, when the Wright brothers achieved liftoff. This was the first time in human history where people made a mechanized flying object that could be manned by a human. The Smithsonian stated, "The Wrights' flyer traveled just 120 feet, but the impact was felt around the world." Professor Alexander Graham Bell is the best known member, has been conducting experiments for more than a year, but so far their performances have ended in disaster. This was said in May of 1908 in this newspaper. It was explaining how Alexander Graham Bell wasn't succeeding while the Wright brothers were receiving all the attention. The paper also wrote, it did not rise in the air, it would not stay on track long enough to gain the headway necessary to ascend into the upper air. This also shows how Alexander Graham Bell was trying to play catch-up with the Wright brothers, and how he was trying to make up time in the last-minute attempt. But his failures proved to the world that Bell was not on the same level as the Wright brothers, and that he was not qualified to create the first flying machine. Due to this, the Wright brothers came out with the title of creating one of the best inventions mankind has ever seen. On January 22, 1904, the Wright brothers did the final step in inventing a new thing by employing a lawyer to work on their patent so that their achievement could be accredited to them. The Wrights chose to keep their secret and have steadfast refused to give public exhibitions of their device. This was a huge part in the creation of the flying machine, because if they released the plans, diagrams, and all the tests they've done, someone could have taken the title of the first inventor of the plane. They eventually had to release the plans of the first plane so other inventors could recreate the machine, and so they could make bigger and better versions of it. Nowadays, Kitty Hawk is a landmark for people to visit so they can learn about the creation of the first plane, and where it was first flown. People can walk along the site where they had the historic 14-second flight. While standing at this location, historian Peter Jacobs stated, "It is at this exact location where flight went from fantasy to reality." The time from then to now, the changes that have been made to planes are extraordinary because now we have many types of planes. There are models that are made for commercial use, and there are models which would be specialized for warfare. Preceding the invention of the airplane, issues would start to arise with countries, and eventually war would break out. The war is known as the Great War. This marks the first time in history that aircraft would be used by a military. Britain and Germany realized quickly how crucial the use of planes could be in planning their attacks. In the beginning, they were only used for reconnaissance. These were two-seater with a pilot to do the flying and an observer up front to man the binoculars and take notes, says Goodman. Even though these planes were manned by only 2 people, there was a lot of weight on the shoulders because one piece of misinformation is all it takes for the war to be directed in the favor of the opposing side. All this would soon make a necessity for cameras to be mounted on the plane so the information can be processed and transmitted without issue. This would allow militaries to make more accurate and strategic moves. The militaries then had the idea of taking the fight to the skies. This would give countries with an air force a strategic advantage, because they would start to know their opponent's every move. The countries saw all this as a problem, so they started to send out posters warning the public of the various types of airplanes, what is friendly and what is an enemy. Through the innovation of the Wright brothers, they were able to be the first to make a machine that could sustain flight and also carry a person along with it. By revolutionizing transportation and warfare, the Wright brothers' success at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina marked the most significant turning point in the early 20th century. While the airplane was turned into a warfare machine that would be the last thing many men would ever see, the airplane still changed the world in many good ways. The Wright brothers left their mark on history, and even though they didn't die prosperous, they still changed our world forever.